Now, ITV's latest drama tells the chilling true story of the British Post Office scandal, which saw hundreds of sub-postmasters falsely accused of theft, fraud and false accounting due to a defective IT system. Mr Bates versus the Post Office, which is airing across 4 consecutive nights on ITV this week, and it's also on their app. It focuses on Alan Bates, played by Toby Jones. He's a sub-postmaster from Wales who played a key role in the campaign to expose the Post Office Horizon IT scandal.
The Post Office told every single one of us sat here today, over and over, you're the only one. And that was wrong. That was a lie, actually. Because, well, look at us. Here we all are. And from this moment forwards, none of us will be the only one ever again.
The series also follows many other sub-postmasters caught up in the claims and explores the devastating impacts on their lives. And I've been speaking to the journalist Nick Wallace, who covered the story from the very start and reported extensively on the failure within the Post Office. And I began asking him, what were the problems with this new IT system?
It just simply had a cash accounting function which couldn't add up properly. Fujitsu knew this, but it did everything it could to hide it from the Post Office and pretend it was working. And eventually the Post Office saw enough of it to believe that that was the case and allowed Fujitsu to roll it out into their network. And when the problem started, which they did immediately, and postmasters started finding holes in their accounts, inexplicable transactions going missing, transactions doubling, the Post Office decided to believe the assurances of Fujitsu and start demanding those discrepancies be repaid out of the pockets of individual sub-postmasters. And we're talking tens of thousands of pounds in some cases. And of course, that meant the postmasters were unable to continue operating as a business. They went bankrupt, they were sacked, they were suspended, and sometimes prosecuted through the criminal courts by the Post Office.
And I suppose as I watched the show, one of the things which struck me was that overwhelming sense of dread and frustration that those postmasters must have faced, because they knew they were doing nothing wrong. They were asking for help, and they were just being told, this is your fault and you need to make this money good.
Well, Horizon, and I think the drama does do a very good job of showing this, it was like a cuckoo in the nest. It was put into their Post Office counters. They had absolutely no choice. They had to use the system. But it took control of their accounts out of their hands, and it put it in control of Fujitsu and the Post Office. Yet under the terms of the contract, the sub-postmasters were legally responsible for their accounts. And so when they tried to get help, when they tried to get the Post Office to investigate what was going wrong with their accounts, the Post Office said, you have no right to an investigation. You are legally responsible for your accounts. You have a hole in your account. If you don't pay up, you will lose your job, you will lose your livelihood, and you are at risk of being prosecuted for theft. And so that creeping dread, that sense that everything was swimming down the plug hole, didn't just do for people's finances, it did for their mental health as well. They became traumatised.
Yeah, that's the other thing, reading about all this, you just see the impact that stress can have on the human body. People, not just financially, but physically, were ruined by this entire process.
Well, I know you're going to speak to Deirdre Connolly, who is a wonderful woman who worked so hard with her family to make a success of her life and make a successful business for herself. And the way she was treated has harmed her, because that was the power of the Post Office. When you are a very visible person within your community, when you're a community-minded person given the responsibility of handling public money, and suddenly you're suspended, suddenly you're locked out of the shop, suddenly there's someone else working behind the Post Office counter, the rumour mill starts. And for people who were very proud to be seen as visible within their communities and starting to hear the whispering campaigns, which they couldn't do anything about, it does terrible things to their confidence and traumatises them, and it makes it very, very difficult to come back from there. But the damage that has been done to thousands of families around the UK is unforgivable, especially given that no one has yet been held to account for it.
And the central character in this drama, played by Toby Jones, Alan Bates, he did something quite different, though, from many people. When he was accused of effectively losing the money or taking the money, he wouldn't admit to that. He wouldn't put his hands up. What was it that he did differently that allowed him to actually get into, if you like, a stance where he could fight this?
Alan Bates had two things going for him. One, he is incredibly stubborn, and I've met him a number of times. He is a stubborn man, but that served him very, very well. The second thing he had going for him is that he worked with these sorts of systems before he became a postmaster. They're known as EPOS systems, electronic point of sale systems, which is what the Horizon system does. It does the transactions at the counter and it does the accounting at the back end. And he knew how these systems should work, and he knew what their capacity was for going wrong. So he said to the post office, look, there is money going from my accounts, but I know it's not me. I know it's not my assistants. I run a tight ship here. Give me the tools that I need to properly interrogate my accounts. Give me some supervisor status so I can go in and look to see where these discrepancies are arising. And when we find them, that will help you make your system better because we will be able to identify the error. He knew more than his managers, his inept and sclerotic managers at the post office, about the system than they did. But their response was, no, the money's gone missing. It's your fault. You just give us that back. And he refused. He walked out of his business losing, well, he was sacked, but he walked away losing his £65,000 investment in the business, and he vowed to get even. But it took him 16 years. A lot of people would have thrown in the towel. A lot of people would have made perhaps the wrong decisions under the amount of pressure that the post office put these sub-postmasters under and found themselves in an invidious position. But even though Alan was right, even though Alan did the right thing every single step of the way, he had an awful lot of luck, and it took him nearly 2 decades to get there.
I think that maybe people from Northern Ireland will understand this point better than other places potentially. But what I saw in the drama and in all the reporting is that when the state commits an injustice, it will not easily own up to that. And even if your case is self-evidently right and just, you aren't going to be told, oh, well, yeah, sorry, it's our error. You will actually have to fight incredibly long and hard.
Yes, and that's what Alan Bates did. And I understand that, I mean, this has happened in so many different ways. Of course, you've got everything that with the history of the Troubles in Northern Ireland. You've got the Windrush scandal. You've got the infected blood scandal where the victims were just faced. Yeah, there is no one who's been held to account properly for what went wrong in those scandals. And you're right, the institutional refusal to acknowledge that there may have been a problem and do anything to help the victims who are fighting to put it right is one of the stains on the way that this entire system of government operates in this country. They can hide behind process, structure, lawyers, and just sit this out because they have all the money and have all the power. And
he did mention this earlier, but I suppose what some people might find surprising is that the Post Office effectively has its own quasi-police force investigation service, but not only that, it is a prosecuting authority. So it didn't have to hand over its files to Crown prosecutors or whoever to see, well, is this a reasonable case? They could take the cases directly themselves, which I think many people will have found surprising.
Yeah, and it's different in different jurisdictions. Mm-hmm. So in England and Wales, they completely bypassed the CPS and the police. In Scotland, it had to be not signed off, but it had to be reviewed or looked at by the Procurator Fiscal. And in Northern Ireland, it seemed to be a bit of a hybrid. Sometimes they could be a law unto themselves. Sometimes the authorities would take a look. But the general point, that lack of monitoring, that lack of independent verification that there actually was a case to answer, made the Post Office in a very, very conflicted position because they were the victim, the investigator and the prosecutor all rolled into one. They had a business interest in going after these sub-postmasters when in fact what they should have been doing is saying, right, is it in the interests of justice that there is enough of a case to actually make a prosecution stick here? And so those failings were baked in to the way they went about ruining these people, and that's what the public inquiry over the last year and over the next year will properly unravel, where the failings in the criminal justice system as well as the Post Office's processes actually manifested to create these injustices.
Well, Nick mentioned there Deirdre Connolly, a local woman who was caught up in this scandal, and solicitor Michael Madden is also with us. He's represented a number of people from Northern Ireland in opposition to the post office. Deirdre, what's your story? What happened to you?
Hi, John. The 2nd of June 2010, an auditor came in out of the blue and told me there was a discrepancy, which I disagreed with. They took the keys off me there and then, that day.
That's it. They said that's it. They basically said, right.
That's it. So then I had to go through a number of meetings or interrogations with their post office investigators. And it was like bully boy tactics. They flew somebody in from London one of the mornings, an ex-policeman, to interview me. And it was horrendous. It was horrendous for the family, for what we went through for 14 years now. And not seeing anybody made accountable is soul destroying.
And
watching the drama.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
Watching the drama this week, it's just brought it all back, and it's been very, very hard for a lot of people.
And they were effectively accusing you of stealing the money, is that right?
Yes. They kept asking me, what did you do with the money?
And in terms of what happened to you, did you face prosecution?
No. I got a letter saying that they were not instigating criminal proceedings against me, and I think it was August of that year, 2010. Mm-hmm. But I lost everything because the footfall went down, because there's no smoke without fire.
Yeah.
And it's just... the stigma of it all was awful, John.
And in terms of where you are now, in terms of getting compensated for, the injustice that you suffered, for what was done to your good name, how far have you got with that? What can you expect?
Well, I've submitted my claim. My legal team has, and now the government have 40 days to make me an offer. But the way the compensation and government, they're cutting claims everywhere. So I was involved in the mediation scheme in 2015.
Yeah, which was sort of discredited, really. I read about it. But there was an attempt to basically wriggle out of compensating people.
Yeah. So my claim's in, but I don't know when I'll get an offer, if I get an offer. And even watching the inquiry, John, like all those post office people, all they can say is, I can't recall.
Yeah.
That's so soul destroying.
Yeah. It must have been infuriating, when... Because, and the other thing I think with the inquiry, which is very clear, is that there was knowledge very early on that this system was dodgy and that people were being wrongly accused. But
that makes it worse.
Yeah. Michael Madden, what's the picture in Northern Ireland in terms of people being affected by this scandal?
There have to be dozens of people affected in Northern Ireland. The people that I represent, there's a mixture of different categories. Some people were prosecuted in court, some people weren't, some people were convicted, some people were acquitted. But there are definitely people out there who have not come forward, who have had convictions who undoubtedly would have their convictions overturned if they did come forward. But it's just so difficult for people to do that.
In terms of what's happening with the legal process around convictions, is it now effectively the case that if you were to mount an appeal to a conviction, you would win? Are the post office fighting any of these?
They are. There's a case I was involved with where eventually the prosecution conceded the appeal, so it didn't require a full hearing. There are other cases where full hearings may still be required. Hopefully not, but there is still quite a lot of resistance, even in clear-cut cases, to having the convictions overturned. So, but the expectation is that they will have the convictions overturned. And
Deirdre was talking there also about the compensation process. So how is that running? Because as I understand it, there are two separate schemes there.
There's three separate schemes. There's a recent scheme just introduced recently, but it's complicated enough. But hopefully, if somebody comes forward, they see a lawyer, they can see what criteria they meet in the schemes. But ultimately, people really should be getting compensated for the trauma that they went through.
Deirdre, in terms of how you were able to find other people were being affected by this. How did that go for you? Because I suppose that's one of the things which struck me in the drama, is that this was kind of before social media. So the
Yeah.
post office were telling people, "Oh no, it's only you," and
You're
it was
the
hard
only
for
one.
people to connect. Yeah.
Well, it was my sister-in-law saw a small piece in a paper, over a number of years ago, to contact Alan Bates. So I went and I phoned Alan Bates and told him my story. And at the end of the conversation, he said to me, he says, "Deirdre, you were the only one, weren't you?" And I went, "Yes." And he says, "We'll look after you from here on in," which he did. And then I went over to see the hall meetings and the drama.
Yeah.
I went over to a couple of those and met up with the other UK people. And we still have a WhatsApp group and we keep in touch.
It must have been an enormous sense of relief, even at that stage, just to know I'm not going mad. It did affect other people.
Yeah, 100%. It was great to know that there was other people, and it wasn't just me.
And in terms of the drama now, seeing this all laid out for a big TV audience, is there a sense of catharsis for you, a sense of relief to say?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But we still need, John. We need all the convictions to be overturned in one swoop. We don't need all the hassle that they have to go through. People have been treated horrendously and having to jump through hoops to get compensation, jump through hoops to get their conviction overturned. It's awful, and they're still putting up a fight.
Yeah, and Michael, that's a point I'd also raised there with Nick. When something like this happens, there is an institutional resistance to say we were wrong. And what we saw with the post office, that they fought this for a very long time, even when they knew they were in the wrong.
They did, and Deirdre, who I've had the pleasure to know for some time now, is a remarkable person, and what she's going through and the others are going through is extraordinary. And the things that were said to her during her interview by Post Office when they were interviewing her, there's no doubt it was bully boy tactics, and being told you're the only one. The reason for that was to try and isolate people and to bully people into not coming forward. And it's amazing to think how long they did get away with it before things started coming out into the public.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of, I don't know if you've been across at the public inquiry, what have we learned in the public inquiry about who knew what and when?
The public inquiry is...
I can hear Deirdre laughing there.
Maybe Deirdre doesn't have a huge amount of feel what's coming out, but certainly the public inquiry is the best way to try and uncover the truth, because the public inquiry really is the only body that has the power to call witnesses, cross-examine witnesses. Now, it depends what the witness then says, but certainly that's the only way to really try and get to the bottom of the truth. But certain things are coming out, and for example, there are experts who have been able to show, and there are concessions made about the post office having and Fujitsu having access to live figures from the post office branches, when they were always the postmasters were always told that they didn't, and it wasn't possible for somebody to interfere with their terminal at the time. So these kinds of things are coming out, and the hope is obviously by the end of the inquiry the full picture will become known. Yeah.
A couple of texts in, Ronan in Jordanstown saying, "Hi John, I watched the Alan Bates versus the Post Office programme. It was fantastic. Nobody in authority has answered the question, where did the money go? I would like that question answered." Deirdre or Michael, do you have any insight into where the money went? Was because the Post Office were saying we're missing this. Where did it go?
It's in the cloud.
Yeah.
Well, any money that was paid to Post Office from the staff. So if there was any money, anybody gained money, it was Post Office.
Yeah, and I think actually just looking at it here, Nick, who I was speaking to earlier, if you go to his website, he has a big section on his website where he does answer that question, and basically, one of the things he suggests is fundamentally the Post Office was taking this money from people and putting it onto their own bottom line.
Yep, they were putting it onto suspense account, then adding it into their bottom line.
Yeah, and that's the other astonishing thing in the drama is you see people, remortgaging their houses, doing everything they could to make up this shortfall. And so the wild thing to me as well was, did the Post Office suddenly think that people who work for them, people like Deirdre, that they were just infested with dishonest people? How did nobody sort of say, guys, are we sure about this?
They didn't want to see it. They were covering it up.
Yeah. And a comment from Brian in Askelon. He says, I have followed this story for years. The drama is first class. I found out the Post Office their own policing and prosecution force. It's clear they're only interested in protecting themselves. People committed suicide. Marriages were broken. People went to jail. And this was covered up. And Deirdre, in some ways, you're one of the survivors here. You're one of the survivors.
Yeah. What happened to me was bad, but other people are a lot worse, John.
And is that the thing, that there was a whispering campaign against you? Were people basically saying, oh, she must have done it? Yeah,
of course. It's a small rural area. Some people did. And you felt that. Well, I felt that because I just couldn't face them. Yeah. And in terms of where you are in your life now, have you been able to get back to where you were before all this happened? John, I'll never be back. My health will never be back. I took epilepsy out of the stress of it.
Yeah.
So on medication for anxiety, depression. It's my life's never going to be the same.
Yeah, and I think that was one of the most shocking things as you read through a lot of this is the effect that stress can have on a human body. You could have been a normal, healthy person, and then this is dumped on you, and and you're living proof of that it can completely shatter your health.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. Well, that drama is on ITV all this week. It was part 2 last night, part 3 tonight. We do have a statement from the Post Office which we have to reflect here, and Post Office spokesperson said, we fully share the aims of the current public inquiry set up to establish what went wrong in the past and the accountability for it. We are acutely aware of the human cost of the scandal and are doing all we can to right the wrongs of the past as far as possible. Both Post Office and Government are committed to providing full, fair and final compensation for the people affected. To date, offers of compensation totalling more than 138 million have been made to around 2,700 postmasters, the vast majority of which have been agreed and paid. Interim payments continue to be made in other cases which have not yet been resolved. And the Post Office are also keen to say that when it came to prosecutions in Northern Ireland, the prosecuting authority was the PPS, not the Post Office. And they're also pointing out that in terms of the compensation, the Post Office is administering 2 of those routes, and the Government is responsible for what's called the Group Litigation Order Scheme. So that is the position of the Post Office affected. So, Deirdre, are you hopeful then that you will find out soon about what will happen to compensation for you?
Well, the countdown's on, John.
Yeah.
I'm timing them.
Yeah. And Michael, I suppose for people who haven't come forward yet, there's still time. There's still time.
There is. There's no time limit. If somebody has been convicted, there's absolutely no time limit to come forward and have the conviction overturned. I had a woman rang me yesterday whose husband was a postmaster back in the early noughties, and he was only able to come forward after watching that programme this week, and it was so emotional for him he couldn't actually physically speak to me that his wife spoke to me. So it's difficult for people to come forward, but if they do come forward, there is no time limit to have convictions overturned.
Yeah, and in terms of the compensation routes, are there time limits around those? Do you know?
Certainly, if anybody comes forward to make a claim, they should be entitled to make that claim. Whether or not they meet one or other of the criteria of this current schemes, everybody be entitled to proper compensation.
Right. So a final comment here from Malachi in Argyllon. He says, it beggars belief for me, someone in the Post Office should have noticed that a lot of money was disappearing from all the different post offices. It doesn't make sense. If you were running a business and all the shops were losing money at the one time, you wouldn't think someone was stealing. You would think something else was happening, which there's a perfect logic to Malachi's comment there, but one which was not followed by the Post Office. So thank you both very much for speaking to us on that. It is a shocking story. You can read Nick Wallace's blog, which has all the details of the investigations over the years. You can see the concluding parts of that series over the next couple of nights, and it's also on the ITVX app. Deirdre, thank you very much for coming on. Stay in touch with us. Let us know what happens in terms of your compensation. I hope things will improve for you this year. And Michael, thank you also very much for coming in.